Afternoon, gents. Reset Sniper check in with you, and the role and the topic is oil as financial weapon, and also the failure of mainstream media and even those that position themselves as alternative media to recognize synchronized financial warfare by all departments of state, by a super layer dark state entities that see everything be actually synchronized. People keep thinking that there's independent thought, there's independent action in the Fed, the politics. They cultivate narratives that Trump is at war with the Federal Reserve figures that are running this. They cultivate Treasury having a different opinion here, and then private banking, Goldman Sachs, not being understood by Treasury type banking parties, and they create these silos so that all major blowouts that come in the future can always be, well, that's these things that fall in between the gaps between this department and that, and they're always just accidents of communication, accidents of understanding between corporate sector workers government sector workers in the Fed versus private bankers' incentives, where they don't have an understanding for the culture. These kind of discussions are common, and they're horseshit. It's all synchronized and people are all acting dumb. It's like Greenspan saying the 2008 subprime debt crisis was a black swan event. Of course it wasn't. It's an absolute lie. It's not some random bunny that jumped out of a hat. It was utterly predictable, as per the Mike Burry in The Big Short, who's the real hero in that narrative, who saw it and took action on it and profited on it and was punished, audited repeatedly, investigated by the Feds, investigated by the IRS repeatedly, for being the guy that saw the scam and profited it from the scam and called the people out for the scam that it was. And that's suddenly how justice came burrowing down and collapsing on his head, where in the case of the actual bankers themselves, no one went to jail at all. So let's talk about oil. Oil, as I've referred to before, is the Rockefeller tax. When they print loads of money, they create lots of liquidity, and they put a bunch of heat into the market. They up the oil price with it, and it's like a thermostat tax, so that while you're living the good period and the largesse, and you're consuming and spending, and those Amazon parcels are being dropped on your doorstep by delivery van, by DHL plane, flown from wherever it's been manufactured, shipped, etc., etc. Oil is being used on that. So that feel-good factor, you're actually being taxed, not just on your custom and exercise out of Royal Mail with their new tricks that they are squeezing new juice out of the system that no one was ever told would be squeezed before it was listed and put in private hands, and now all these new profiteering handling fees are coming in. None of that, you're paying that already anyway. I'm talking about the cost of delivery, the cost, all of these aspects that are in the oil price, the plastics, the packaging. Oil is in everything. So the oil price is pushed up, so these oil companies actually do exceedingly well in these manufactured liquidity booms. So the whole game is to create ebbs and flows, this tide in money in the system. And when they create a pump with the liquidity flow into the system, they get everybody chasing the pump and momentum chasing. They know this. This is typical of all retail traders, and it's even more typical of all retail consumers. Feel-good factor, holidays, upgrade the home, rebuild, buy more flat screen TVs, etc., etc. Then they orchestrate the contraction, and that's how they get you shaken out of your homes. Anything that's worthwhile as an asset, they send the price collapsing. They get the banks to then say, hey, you're behind on your mortgage and you need to pay a much higher interest rate. So they get you, they suck you into the consumption and a lot of it also has debt elements in it. They suck you in it, and they keep the debt cheap, as they have done, and everything seems so much more affordable, and you're putting your hand deeper and deeper into that sweetie jar, and it's a long jar, and you've got your entire arm in it reaching for the big chocolates right at the bottom, and then they lock it up. They lock up those sweets. They suddenly turn like glue, and your arm is stuck, and it gets severed at the shoulder joint because you owe your pound of flesh. And you reached in when they were making it sweet and easy and go for it and have all you want. It's cheap, and then boom, they start turning the screws, and very, very quickly the people that were giving you the credit and the power to shove your arm that deep in the jar suddenly shut it off, and you can't pull it out. So banks are there to offer you money when you don't need it, to seduce you into having things you don't really want or need, and to take it away when you need it most, or to put the price up so high that it is utterly punitive and that you're sweating and you live to pay your bills. And this is the financial slavery of the game. So the oil price, this whole fracking debacle that I spoke of many years ago, and I've touched on and referenced many times before, is an utterly sub-economic oil flushing out ruse. So they've found something that has a once-off benefit that has an incredibly steep diminishing rate of returns curve. So after the first year, you lose about 69% of your output in the second year, and you have to frack 3 times, 4 times more to get the same scrape of oil that you get on that first hit. So it's an incredibly steep diminishing returns curve. It's a bad business to get in by any means. In fact, you have to be opening 3 or 4, 5 times more wells just to maintain the same level of output, which of course sees your costs go absolutely exponential. So it's best when you start and it's all downhill in a hyperbolic fashion. Costs like this, many more fractures required to get the same scrape, and returns like that. In fact, fracking now had a negative cash flow of over 9 billion this year. So you're thinking, how was this business even allowed to happen? And who wanted to be in that business? Who's going, yeah, I want to be a frack oil guy? You pay for a well, and normally in oil wells, they can reduce about 10%. Fracking, you get 69% reduction on average in the Bakken, that's North Dakota wells, and then 85% over 3 years. So by the third year, you're getting 15% of your first hit. So it's almost like a drug that normally you need more of, only this is an inverse drug. Your coke dealer gets you hooked on 1 gram a day, and then he starts giving you 1/15 of that as you're getting more and more desensitized to what was giving you a hit, and you're now needing 4 or 5 times more, and you're actually getting a fraction of what you originally got. So that's called a real feel bad habit that just goes downhill very, very quickly. So how did it come about? How did banks fund such a terrible business? So imagine I go as little, small, medium enterprise and say, hey, I want to open this business. And in my first year, I should do X. And after that, I'm only going to do less 69%. I'm going to do 31% of my original year's revenue. And after that, by year 3, I'm actually going to be on about 15% of my original. Please lend me money for this business. I'm retailing Christmas outfits, let's just say, something trivial and stupid like that. I don't think the business plan is going to fly. I don't think I'm going to get lent money. But here we have something that's called systemically critical industry. And all this means is dark state agenda. Because what the likes of Max Kaiser and everyone else who comments on this failed to say is, yeah, they're only interested in saying, yeah, we said this long time ago. Mate, you weren't the only one to say this long time ago. So did I. So did many other people. Don't go around claiming credit and it's all about you. lots of people have done, and I've relied on other people's research also for any commentary I've made. I'm not out there counting oil wells and oil sheets. I'm just reading other analysts' work. But what they don't do is they say, yeah, we said this, and now, Krugman's come out. No, you're wrong. All you've said is that, okay, so the central bank is guilty because they lowered interest rates. That's not the sole reason that central banks are guilty. There's many links in the chain. Why did the banks lend to them in the first place? Because politicians made it so. We had British politicians that were all environmentalists and going on sledges and hugging huskies that suddenly were enforcing and handing out fracking licenses. Why? Because the dark state required it to be so. Why? Because they wanted a global oil glut. Why? Because it served the purposes of the dark states and all the nation states they were waging financial war against, such as Russia, Venezuela, Iran, Syria. It was a coordinated action that involved the monetary policy of all the Western central banks as part of a reaction to the Great Depression of 2008. And the oil price went so high during the boom, and then it was killing people. People didn't have consumption or expenditure. They needed to kill the oil price to try build some heat back in the economy, because China indebted and was going into their own crash and was the only person still buying anything in the 09-10. They needed to reflate the economy. So they needed to kill the Rockefeller tax for a while, overkill it and flush out all those options and create a glut. And they wanted and needed to wage war, which they're still doing, verbal financial war against the ruble, against the Venezuelan peso, etc., etc., etc. So what you essentially have is the fact that these guys, not just, the central banks did it indirectly by their low interest rate policy. The low interest rate policy was an attempt to put heat back in the economy, and everything else that was led through the banks that provided funding to these companies was done on a business plan that should never fly. On a short-term business that gives a quick hit for a short while, that then gives a quick hit of employment as well, when a lot of people have been laid off, and your non-farm numbers, you don't want them to look too terrible, and you need to hire some truck drivers and people on ridiculous salaries up in North Dakota, flushing this out. So you all get everybody paid real good, so there's plenty available of labor to create a temporary, what will be a 5 to 10 year tops glut that is almost played out in full from when it first started. When did it first start? When you look at the oil production charts, I will place this oil production charts. I'm doing this ad hoc from my phone, but I will place this image of the oil production charts for you guys, and you will see that this all started at the base of 09. The base oil production, US daily oil production, started flying from 09. Yes, that's right. And then it went all the way up, 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 up. They then were no longer an importer from Saudi. They actually were independent of any import requirements. So Saudis, who was the buffer producer and the biggest producer that would always top up, suddenly had to print more oil. So they dug out more oil out the bottom. So it was just like fiat money. Everybody then had to max out oil. They know that markets are not actually inherently stable. They don't always gravitate to the middle. They go to the extreme. You knock the price down, all those nation states that require oil revenue to pay for everything else and all the other social welfare and rubbish they shouldn't be funding on an oil bubble, have to print, aka dig and pump, more oil than they used to, just to have the same revenue. And the more they pump more oil, the more the price goes down. And that means the more they have to pump more oil to have the same X number to pay all the government parastatal employees and everybody else that they've loaded on the big lump. So you ended up creating a bust for Venezuela. It's ironic that Chavez, while still alive before being cancered out, who knows how, it's ironic that Chavez, who had his gold, who demanded the return of his gold and paraded the gold in his street, suddenly was punished, and the leaders that followed in his footsteps after his death have seen Venezuela punished so harshly for demanding their gold, something the Dutch managed to get back and the Germans not so successfully, although in part, for asking for their gold reserves back. So what you actually have is, at the same time, the Russians that are being attacked at an energy level, who have huge gas, oil, and yellow cake, which is uranium for warheads that they decommissioned. In other words, exceedingly strong in the energy space, gets energy-based warfare launched against them, which critically affects their revenue, to attack and to defund and cause loss of power in the ruble. We see it. This is my reset sniper hat. We see it in the market sniper. We've traded upside HVFs against the ruble. We could see this collapse coming with the same time, 2014, when the oil tipped and rolled at the point when we were at the highest point that we could even have a war between with the Maidan crisis to Ukraine and Russia. Oil turned around and binned it down. Never had you had news so supported for oil. Why? Because everyone was pumping, supply and demand. It doesn't matter. Everybody was pumping. Saudi was up. Everybody was up. Everyone else who was battling to make their revenue, like the likes of Venezuela, would cheat and say, no, we have to pump more. We have to pump more. So they were all pumping in an unstable market. Why? Because a destabilizer was introduced that was non-economic and will not exist and is not sustainable, and caused immense ecological damage, because not only does fracking go down very deep, find a piece of slate, it then goes horizontally across, and then you chip it and break it, and you scrape off the slate the oil, and each time you get less, and then sometimes you go down again and horizontally again. So the fracking ends up not even being in the surface land that you have the mineral rights to. It becomes under somebody's house in a residential area 4 or 5 miles to the right, and in their water, the artesian wells and the water levels, and then you get gas coming through people's pipes, which they light flames. You've all seen it. You've all seen the massive damage. This is why they're saying there's too many people on the planet. We need a population reduction. We should all be recycling. We should all be hugging huskies and going to the North Pole. And I agree, we should actually avoid having external effects beyond what they are needed. But they talk that one game and they play another and do immense damage to tip oil into oversupply, and then to cause financial pain for their primary enemies. And it wasn't just the central bank, it was all of them, because those primary bankers that kept giving loans to businesses that they knew that are unsustainable, that debt isn't going to be paid, and who's bought it all? The dumb boomers' pensions have had it stuffed in there. Other people are all part of the debt Ponzi. If you're owning pensions, if you have any form of managed funds that is in the big banker realm, you will have parts of that rubbish. And those that are relying on pensions, let me just say to you, that's the shakiest ground ever to be standing on. And you should take control actively of managing your own money immediately if you have it under some sort of Wall Street equivalent, because this government debt is out of control, and it's going to be the most destroyed asset class, and it's going to usher in global communism for those that are all elderly, particularly when you become ward of state and you're now a social asset that needs housing and homing and further taxing on those that are still productive, and you're going to have less a whole bunch less when you find out what rubbish has been put there and paid for with your hard-earned and your depreciating dollars that once were worth a lot more and have been proliferated into nothing and invested in businesses that are deemed systemically insignificant. No, they're not. No, it wasn't. You didn't have to introduce that destabilizer to the market, but you wanted to squeeze the nuts of all your geopolitical enemies. You wanted to, having created the biggest depression and killed consumption and created so much fear, you wanted to reflate to not for the citizens, but for the banks that had been overshot, destroyed. You wanted to reflate those housing books because everybody could throw the keys at you and say, have your 100 grand debt and have your $20,000 home back, add zeros to suit. Have your $1 million home that's actually worth 200,000 back, have it all back, and that would have left them all hopelessly insolvent. And then the big mechanism for cheating and creating hardship and managing the slaves in an usury system would have been broken. So they have to save their banks under the ruse that they're saving you. They're not saving you. In fact, you've not benefited. If you've not benefited, it's mainly institutions and high net worth people that have benefited from the recovery since 08, 09. The people with access to credit who bought, Israelis who were tipped off to buy Apple and Facebook 4 or 5 years ago, all the usual insiders have been in the fangs and have seen those things go up, 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 up for the last, since 08, 09, 4, 5, 6, and in some cases tenfold times. You have not participated in that. You haven't had a significant slice of your wealth in that. You've been trying to wipe the crap out of your eyes post 2008 and just get working again, just get a job again. Just try reorganize your finances, struggling with your debt. Thank God the price on that debt dropped, but that's the only relief you've got. So this is not, if you look at the Gini curve since 08 to 18, it's now 10-year anniversary since 2008 coming for the Lehman Brothers. Believe you me, this was a depression and that's coming. And this fake reflation effort is all banker cartel controlled through the cabal of central banks globally, where they had the Shanghai Accord after China then fell apart after trying to be the buyer of last resort for everyone. China have made some comments about their concern about US Treasury holdings and how it's been looked after. Russia has reduced its US Treasury holdings. These is the war. People are saying, have your shitty investments back. You're attacking my currency. Well, I will sell your dollar-based pile of rubbish debts and I'll buy gold. In the same way Chavez, who paraded his gold, Russia is accumulating gold, China is accumulating gold and reducing their debt. The irony is, right now, gold and silver is falling, but it's probably a buy on the dips eventually. It will be the more stable asset compared to bonds, the great debt bubble, the government debt, the corporate debt, and all those other things. So to kind of get some inflows back, Russia's been selling their treasuries and saying, have your debt Ponzi scheme. If you're going to financially attack me, we don't need to support you and take a loss on holding these assets, especially as interest rates now going up. All that's going to happen is they're going to orchestrate a slowdown. In fact, I would say that slowdown is already well on the way, and it is being orchestrated now. And I think we'll feel the first elements of that collapse coming round about September, October period. I think it's going to be a very concerning period for us globally, macroeconomically. I think for traders, we're going to be making more of our money short in the general markets, particularly. And that means it's going to be a tough time for the retail person. And why? You never got the gift of the reflation boom. No one handed you the script and said, don't worry, just be majorly net long the US equities. This is just going to be pumped to the moon. Interest rates are going to be kept low. The corporations are going to be allowed to borrow as much as they damn well like to buy their own stock back into all told highs. They can borrow to even pay their own interest payments. This is like when you're at home and you're using one credit card to pay the interest on another one, and you're applying for more to pay for the interest on the second one. That generally is not a game that ends well for your personal financial situation, and interest rates could spike. But before that, we could have what I would consider to be the depression again, the lack of liquidity and the lack of buying power in the retail area. And then we have a major stock market correction again, and we have people who are over in debt, job cutbacks, and a variety of other things. But what frustrates me and what started this entire narrative is that oil is one of the weapons. Being able to control the price and being able to bring in non-economic, business-based extraction policies that are short-term, ecologically disastrous, and going to lead to a lot of wasted debt that won't be paid back and bankrupt businesses is a part of the plan. They know that. And the banks that lend them know they've got bad stuff on their books. Who allows them to do that? The dark state mechanism that says this is systemically interesting, give these people a debt. I'd love to have a business that's non-economic, and I get sent as much money as I need to run it, and I can pay huge salaries to myself and everyone who works, and it's a 5-year thing, and then I leave a big hole of a debt balance sheet, and it just gets written off because I served my purpose for a 5-7 year model just to tip the supply equation in a major commodity like oil, so that you could damage and force those other countries to overproduce just to earn the same amount of revenue, and even more and more and more. And that becomes a self-feeding cycle that sees the price drop lower. So they all eventually end up being financially squeezed. And then guess what? Who do you think buys up all these assets at the bottom? This is the game, the pump and dump scheme. Who do you think will own all the homes? Hedge funds will own homes that people are thrown out of, that reflated, rebought at the top of the market in Australia, in New Zealand, and all of that. And then you'll become tenants in these large hedge funds. And these will be friends of government. They will be part of the corporatocracy. The extension and the blurry lines between central government and the overall corporatocracy is very, you think, oh, well, that's private sector in one silo and that's public sector in another silo. This is all dark state orchestrated. The hedge fund is then deemed too systemic and significant to fail because it provides housing for everybody who's shaken out all of these successful pump and dump schemes, and basically they get shored up by government decree. Basically you have a parastatal government that is housing providing, and you don't even realize you're in the new socialist utopia, in fact communistic utopia, where the oligarchical major corporations are running the world and government is managing through them. And Alex Jones gets simultaneously banned off 6 different social medias all on the same day, and you wonder, how did they all, as separate business entities, all come to the same decision at the exact same moment? They didn't. They were told. They were told by the people that tell them what to do, and that's how the game is. And so sometimes Squealing Max Kaiser, he sort of gets on interesting stories, but he never buries them. He never gets it all out. He's saying, oh, it's a conspiracy theory to say that the central bank is responsible, and now it's a conspiracy fact, and well done. They're all part of the same system, Max. Why do you just say it's just like one party that is wrong? They're all part. They have all orchestrated this. You need government. You need people that are going to run these businesses, these fracking businesses, and know that it's just a quick hit of a punt and make money and take it in shares and salaries quickly, early, get out fast, because it'll all be worth nothing in 7 years' time, and it's non-sustainable, and you're a bastard who's spoiled the water table for everybody in the surrounding area. Go be that drug dealer that destroys a neighborhood, takes a quick hit of bucks, and then watches the whole place burn. Why doesn't he see that this is all part of the control structure? These are financial frauds that are perpetrated by state with the cooperation of major corporations, individuals prepared to run companies for a certain period in a non-economic manner, being provided capital by non-economic decision makers who are supposed to be protecting the capital because they are meant to remain stable so that they do not need taxpayers' bankouts. They do not need further tax extraction from you to keep the social banking system up. And in fact, they make even bigger mistakes because they've been instructed to, and it's been waived, and they've already got a decree written up somewhere. A nod and a wink from the dark state is that they'll be made whole once again. AIG all over. Goldman Sachs paid on par for all the collateralized debt obligations that they were creating and caught with, that they at the last minute insured with AIG. The losses that were the other side of Michael Burry's big short that should have been carried by those investment gangs were given to you to carry. When those insurance companies were made whole, backed up by the government who utilizes your tax revenue and the future income streams of that tax revenue. And they've already written so many checks against that money that they can't afford their pension scheme anymore. It is such a Ponzi, and it's coordinated, and it is totally understandable. It is not a black swan event. It will end. It will be epic. It's going to cause a wholesale depression, and it could be the oncoming of a technological, corporatocracy-driven communism state where all the parties, while acting like separate entities and having characters that don't like him, and everyone gets all sucked into the social drama. Oh, the new Fed chair doesn't like Trump, or Trump doesn't like him, and this and this and that, and thinking that these people, all these parts aren't talking to each other. They're absolutely coordinated and controlled on all the big issues that matter. And even if they do not like each other or won't have a cocktail on in it, they're part of the same Broederbond, part of the same dark state, part of the same system. They got put there for a reason and a purpose. And all of this is financial warmongering, and oil is one of the key aspects. Lending is another. Debt is clearly an instrument of financial destruction, and the way it is being utilized is non-economic, and the tab to be carried is always the taxpayer and the citizen. And these people are being given a free ride to run businesses that are non-economic for a specific purpose, to achieve a geopolitical goal that is strategic and is deemed a requirement by the dark state that is perpetually waging a war, whether financial, economic, or hacking across other nation states, to continually keep them in a state of engagement. That is the fact and the raw truth of the system that you are part of. Anyway, I'm done.